Well, I'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. My name's Darian Nasvogel. We're gonna run ahead with this Cat AI webinar about supercharged AI knowledge. I'm gonna give you a quick, if I can get my slides to move, quick overview and some general housekeeping. So like I said, I'm Darian. Karima and Bobby here are your illustrious speakers. If you guys want to introduce yourself really quick.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karima, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm a member of the CAT advisory team under Copilot Engineering, and I get to make enterprise-grade agent implementation successful every day. And I'm really happy to come and share with you today.
So, hey, thanks for the intro there, Darian. Hello, everybody. My name is Bobby Chang. I'm part of the Copilot Acceleration team, specifically on the Copilot agent development projects, where I get to work with some of the best customers that we have all over the world to be able to prove out agent of high impacts that could be co-built and actually running in their environment. So, really looking forward to diving a little bit deeper into Dataverse and Copilot Studio today.
Today, we are going to deep dive into Dataverse. All right. So let's start with a little story. So if we go back a few years, what we called bots were really just apps in disguise. Some platforms were making great advances with natural language and context, and at the core, what a lot of agents was doing high value tasks that they performed really well with the precision of an app. Now, with the advent of LLMs, this changed. Everyone shifted to a lot of grounded knowledge use cases, and they really wanted to answer questions and produce text, and those got really powerful. And we also noticed that knowledge creation is not always straightforward. And Copilot Studio understood something really early that is really now becoming mainstream, which is that the real value of conversational agents is more than conversation, understanding, and answering. It's that orchestration over more than knowledge and using AI on business processes to do a job with that sliding scale of AI and control.
Mine.
So how do we harness this business process skill by an AI? Well, the first thing to do is to think of your agent as a persona that can reason. And then we equip it with our tables and existing tools that are already structured and curated. Then you can give your persona some business rules and guardrails and let them decide, follow up, and complete work. And look at this agent. It looks as busy as one of us, right? So question always comes up, can we trust our agent, an agent like that, on our business processes? Well, actually, the first layer of precision that that agent has is completely baked into the tools that it will be using, right? So what you're using the AI for is to wield an existing tool instead of replacing it, right? So you're not going to tell an AI to use to think about a calculation. You will give it a calculation tool to use, and that reduces hallucinations right up top, right? And so now we can think about how are we going to get predictable results from these tools that we already trust using AI. And Copilot Studio offers these granular control levers so that enterprises have all the advantages of AI with deterministic controls. So with this kind of agentic persona approach, the Copilot Studio agent can act on the behalf of a business with intention because agents will follow processes and rules, and because they can also get intercepted with functions and guardrails that provide critical scenarios, right? And so now you get agents that can act as trusted SMEs, like invoicing agents and fraud agents and validation agents and help desk agents. And all of this happens because Copilot Studio and agentic AI actually is very good with structured data and dynamic chaining of APIs. So how does all of this relate to today's Dataverse topic? So in this session, we really want to enable you to build these high-functioning smart agents over your table data. And people normally have two main use cases for table data. Today, we're going to focus on these functional enterprise agents that are often needed over data. For example, if you have a municipal directory or an inventory or shipments or incidents, and you really need speed and precision, and you have business rules to follow in order to answer these questions really fast. And then hopefully we'll have another session on analytical agents. So really, we want to show you what tools are available to be able to talk over your data that is in Dataverse and how you can add intelligence with Copilot Studio. So we've prepared this little agenda for this session. It is question-based. We're going to drop this image into the chat. And although I don't have a poll, I would really like you to think about this and let us know which of these questions really resonate with you. Are these realistic expectations for a conversational agent over data? Over to you, Bobby.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Karima, for that awesome intro. I'm going to keep it going if it's okay here and just start at a very high level, right? Like when we talk about agents, especially the enterprise grade agent that a lot of our customers are requiring, like we got to start really at the enterprise grade security compliance and requirements, right, to meet the organizations at their security posture. So want to start at a very high level, like why are we talking about Dataverse to begin with? Some of us may or may not know or have like much in-depth knowledge of Dataverse, right? Whether you use Dataverse directly or not, right? If you use any of the Power Platform services of Copilot Studio, you're already using Dataverse, right? Dataverse is really the fabric of security logging for a lot of our conversational transcript. And what we are seeing basically in terms of Dataverse and how it serves, number one, is sort of being able to kind of do this back-end services, right? Dataverse in itself is a unified data platform that actually is comprised of over 60 Azure services, but the Azure services is kind of behind the scene, right? Like you get the scale without really needing the Azure subscription, right? Like, so you don't have to live in the PaaS and the IaaS layers, but you're getting all the goodness that Azure gives you in terms of security at scale and enterprise scalability that a lot of organizations need. So what we are showing you as a backdrop is kind of this as a reminder, right? A lot of us here might even come in from the deep end, like back end dynamics world as well, that, you know, obviously Dataverse is a part of all of those offerings too. But what we want to focus on in terms of retrieval for Copilot Studio is not just that Dataverse is a back end data platform that Copilot Studio is sitting on top of, but what we want to show is this kind of synergy between what Dataverse provides as a data platform and what Copilot Studio agent can do in retrieving information that might be inside of Dataverse, right? So you're going to see a lot of very specific ways and techniques that we can leverage because Dataverse comes with all these goodness to be able to do various different kind of searches, whether it's searching through unstructured documents that lives inside of Dataverse, could be searching over structured data, right? A lot of the focus that's going to be today there around like tables, columns, relationship, and also what we call like relevance searching that could be fuzzy searching, right? Because sometimes users don't quite know what they're actually searching for. So we got to kind of peel the different complexity of where the users are coming from and then be able to retrofit it into the various search strategies and strategies that you're going to have hand in hand between Copilot Studio and Building Agent and the backend data that you're going to be leveraging potentially for the data platform, because Copilot Studio is very expansive, right? We can do a lot of components here, not just from Dataverse. Obviously, this is going to be the focus of today's session, but just know that from a standpoint of grounding your agent to various knowledge, you can do first-party Microsoft services on the backend from a data storage perspective, right? We're talking SharePoint, OneDrive, Azure AI Search, but we're also opening it up in terms of the Copilot Studio agent being able to ground itself in things like Snowflake, Databricks, right? Like other knowledge base that might be Salesforce, ServiceNow. So the idea here is that we want to make sure that the agent is really guardrail grounded into the KBs that you really care about, number one. Number two, we don't want to force you into migration, right? If you've already got a system source of record that's sitting somewhere, we want to make sure that the agent is going to come to where your source of information is actually living. So obviously today is going to be the focus on Dataverse, but we want to ground that component as well and kind of remind folks on the call here that the Copilot Studio extensibility story is far greater than just the Dataverse storage and grounded knowledge component, right? And on top of that, what Copilot Studio can do is not just ground itself in terms of the AI agent knowing the specificity around your knowledge sources and the data that you care about, but it can actually act on your behalf as well if you let it, right? Like with instructions and what we call tools from a standpoint of Copilot Studio. The idea here is that, think of like the typical CRUD operation. It's not just retrieving, which we're going to do a lot today, but there's going to be processes and scenarios that you're going to chase after that might be a creation of record, an update of record, or delete a record, right? We can do this at scale as well by allowing the agent to have this concept of tooling, right? Being able to use our pre-built connector. At this point, we have over 1,400 pre-built connector to allow you to securely connect to your system source of record. You can use the open standard model context protocol, or MCP for short, to be able to kind of group these APIs together and essentially have an MCP make it really easy for the agent to interact with the user and process what the user is asking for with various APIs that's happening on the back end here too. For today's conversation, we're going to focus on a few of this, but just know that from a standpoint of Dataverse and where you can actually plug in using tools inside of the Copilot Studio architecture is basically everywhere. It's almost like you've got a lot of options here. We want to actually pick on a few today and kind of focus on a few to show you a few strategies that you can have depending on where you're trying to go in retrieving the data to be really specific about the output that your users should be seeing based on the scenarios that you've got, right? So we're going to cover a lot here, and Karima's actually going to take us to a few patterns to kind of group some of these things together. Just know that we'll be using a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of tools. Some of the tools that we'll be using the Dataverse connectors. We'll also open up MCP. So we're going to be in a lot of different places here today. So hopefully you kind of bear with us in terms of the pattern that we'll show with you and give you a little bit of tips how to use Dataverse. Hey, I'm going to turn it back over to you here, Karima. Hey, Karima, I think you're muted.
I said so much. So I really liked that you mentioned that, we are going to be talking about a lot of retrieval, but CRUD is really important. And what we hope to show you today is with that sliding scale of AI and control that we have in Copilot Studio, even though today we are showing some really, really complex retrieval use cases, you will find that confidence to be able to use Copilot Studio as a CRUD tool also. Now, you can see my screen, right? Yep. Amazing. All right. So before we can add intelligence to these Dataverse tools, and we saw that Copilot Studio really has a lot of things going for it. What I wanted to focus on in all the things that Copilot Studio has is what are the actual AI services that we can use, right? Is it just one AI service? Is it a plain LLM call? Actually, there's 3 distinct, completely SaaS AI services that Copilot Studio provides. And deciding on when to use what is a really important design decision that will make your agent behave the way you want it to. So orchestration is one that we talk about a lot. It's the brain of the agent that decides what to do when. And if you add a tool and you give it really good inputs and descriptions, your tool or your API or your connector becomes truly intelligent. You can just start conversing over it and it will start acting for you. That's how powerful orchestration is in Copilot Studio. The other really popular SaaS service is Knowledge. And Knowledge just gives you easy grounded answers over your a whole bunch of data sources, including Dataverse tables. And so if you define your table and you add it to Knowledge and you give a really good glossary, because how will Copilot Studio know what your table is about if some of your columns are called column 1, column 2? So it's important to just define what the columns are about. And that's it. You can just start talking over your data with Knowledge. And then the third AI tool that AI service that Copilot Studio offers is that prompt tool, which is, yeah, but I do want that single shot LLM call. Where do I do that? And so if you have a complex single shot LLM call that you want to call again and again, you want to use it as a tool, you want to give it some inputs and pick up the outputs and do something with it afterwards, you have the prompt tool for that. And that one actually uses Dataverse tables pretty well also. So we will be covering a lot of that. Now, when you start building an agent over a table, whatever table it is and whatever kind of agent it is, your most powerful agents end up following a variation of this pattern, right? So this is really the general pattern, and let's go through it. So the user asks a question like, a water main just broke on my street, and what number should I call? All right, so the first thing that the agent does is really understanding what this is about, what do I have access to, and what can I pull on, right? And so the agent should be able to figure out, I have a directory of municipal services, I have this table, all right, I think I know what they're asking for. I'm just missing one piece of information, which is what city they're in, because otherwise there's just going to be too much data to bring back. So it asks back, what city are you in? Immediately under the covers, once you say the city name, a query gets created, right? And so the agent has figured out that you want public works. Your city is New York. It is an emergency, and it really should return the district and the phone number. So that query gets generated, and now your tool gets called with that query. And with that output from that tool, we don't just paste that JSON right into the answer. We want to be intelligent there too. And so you want the agent to kind of look at that and kind of explain that result to the user. And what my agent does here is it says, hey, I found 3 results, and which district is closest to you? Which one do you want? And then if I say what district I want, and I don't just have to pick one, I can say something conversationally like Queens or Brooklyn, and it gives you the number, and then it kind of says, hey, both can handle public works emergency. Now, all of the messages were generated by AI here, and all of the reasoning was done by AI, can be done by AI if you configure a tool. And different agentic platforms and different kinds of answering, or even how knowledge works under the covers, follows this type of pattern. And depending on what AI choices and design choices and tool choices you make for each of these steps, your agent will fulfill a different purpose, will have a different behavior, and then that's where you decide where your levers are. Right? So really that natural language to filter query, that was, the money step, because once you can do that, all of a sudden any API can turn powerful. It becomes a natural language retrieval tool. Really, that's the main value of knowledge over tables, because it relies heavily on taking that great glossary and understanding what each column is about, even without looking inside the column. And just by the user's context, it can build that complex query and then start that retrieval process from that table. And what happens if your preferred knowledge source is not in knowledge yet? Have you ever been waiting for Copilot Studio to surface a certain knowledge source and waiting to be able to use it? Well, in fact, Copilot Studio, as its own core agentic capabilities, can be designed to do this NL to query step for any API also. So even for connectors and data sources that are not yet an officially supported data source, right? SharePoint lists, anyone? So let's see how that works, because that can bring a lot of value. Now, at the core, somewhere in your agent, you want to put an instruction like this that says, hey, this is a Dataverse OData query. It uses this table. These are the fields. These are the properties. These are the constraints. This is the output. And basically, if you describe a query really well, can you expect your agent to just pick it up and use it? And where in your agent should you put that, right? How does that work? Well, actually, we have a few different places where you can do that. You can put it at the top level if that's the only thing your agent is doing. You can segregate it in a child agent if you have like multiple of these long descriptions and you don't just want to make a whole wall of text. But if you have a short one like this, our tool inputs are super powerful. And what is little known is that connectors aren't directly presented to the orchestrator or to the user. They are, once connectors are added to Copilot Studio, they become tools. And tool inputs are separate from actual connector inputs. The connector inputs get hidden under the covers, and the tool inputs become intelligent. And what you describe in those inputs will decide how the orchestrator will interpret the context, will transform the context into a format that the connector can accept, and will use the intelligence and the glossary that you give it. And so in your input, you can put a instruction like this. And now when you look at your agent, you're going to see like an empty agent with one tool, with a few inputs that are well described and a description that's well described. Let's say it's the list rows tool, and all of a sudden you are talking over your table. And now you can take that and then added intelligence to it and tell the top level agent, hey, if there's lots of things that are returned, do another disambiguation question or whatever. That is what you can do out of the box with Copilot Studio. And these are the patterns that we're going to show. And I was talking about list rows because really the first thing that you think about of how you use a table is, well, you can query it. And tables in Dataverse can get queried with OData queries, fetch XML queries, and SQL queries depending on what API you're using. And it's really a deterministic retrieval. And for any data set, large or small, if you are able to filter it down, it's a really good use case for a transactional agent, because if you can filter it down to a manageable size, because conversations on chat have a certain size, and so a reasonable size of output, your LLM has a certain token size, and so see how much you can filter down. See if you have a good use case for deterministically filtering. Use this trick, and then you can actually talk over your data. But why would you do that if you have knowledge that already does that? Well, we do have a structured query over a Dataverse table in knowledge. Now you're going to see that I have a lot on my slides. There's a lot of text on my slide. It's really here so that you can have a reference point in case we were sharing the recording. So I'm not going to go through over all of it, but I did want to let you know, because I don't want you to start trying knowledge and then come back to us going, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't fit my needs at all. So let's just go in with our eyes wide open. Using knowledge gives you out-of-the-box intelligence on your table. Works great, really, really fast. You're going to see it work. It doesn't have that follow-up question answering that you get with tools. You have to use your user authentication. You can't make an anonymous agent using knowledge over Dataverse. And there are a few limitations because knowledge is a very, very complex service. Some steps can make it a little bit slower than using the API itself directly. And so we have here how to use the list rows tool. Also, instructions on the left side, and really lots of advantages. And if that's not enough, we will show you a different tool. But before we do that, back to Bobby.
Awesome. Thank you, Karima. We're going to just see it in action here, right? So thank you, Karima, for laying down the foundation there in terms of the different usage between knowledge and tools. So just actually going to show you what it looks like. But before we get into the agent building side of things, just to kind of show you the Dataverse side of stuff. We purposely are keeping it light just to show it actually as a pattern, right? So what we're going to use from today's illustration, we're going to use two tables. One is a facility table. Think of it as, hey, I want to go someplace. And a lot of these are going to be kind of like community service driven. So you'll see a lot of civic center, a lot of community centers that people can actually go into. And we purposely are naming these very close from one to the next. So you'll see kind of this concept of fuzzy searching in our illustration as well. The other table that we'll use for our illustration is a service offering. So imagine, a facility could have one or many service offerings. In the same way, it's going to be a many-to-many relationship where a service could obviously belong to one or more than one facilities, right? So we got that concept of many-to-many that's just readily available inside of the Dataverse platform. What you'll see first here is what we call the demo website channel. Imagine, if you don't know the concept of a channel, the concept of a channel is essentially where the user is going to be consuming the agent, where the user interface is going to be. Since this is a demo website, this illustrates that even though I'm talking to the agent in an unauthenticated perspective, without having to log in, I can actually expose my Dataverse data into a public website scenario, right? So if I've got question as a user, I can ask the agent from a public website perspective, and you actually see, and we'll see kind of like what's happening behind the scene. This is sending a query to Dataverse on the back end to be able to actually provide that responses to the user on the front end, right? You could also, as a user, be able to have this interactions, not just from a public website perspective. I can actually put this agent behind a secure portal as well. So from a B2B scenarios where you got vendors or suppliers, you can actually ask them to gently sign in before interacting with the agent, and the agent can actually recognize you as a user and do on behalf of user authentication to access the Dataverse backend to ensure that the users asking the agent actually has access to the Dataverse backend as well, right? So what you're going to see here is, again, just a populated list query that I was able to bring in from the Dataverse backend, but I'm doing this in an unauthenticated fashion inside of a public-facing website. But what you'll see, and we're going to do a lot of these in our illustration, is this concept of orchestrator that Karima has outlined, right? The idea here is that the orchestrator could actually understand the inquiries from the user from the full context of the conversation. We call this multi-turn, right? So what you're seeing here is I'm asking my second question after I've asked my first question about the facility in the city of Brookside, right? I was able to list all of this facility. They're all in the district of Central. I then followed up and say, hey, that's great. Tell me about other facility in that district. You notice I purposely did not call that I wanted a central district. But again, an orchestrator is smart enough to understand multi-turn. It knows the context of the conversation from start to finish. So it's able to make that second query into Dataverse with central district being the knowledge that it knows for that short-term memory that it can retrieve from the Dataverse backend, right? So again, the idea here is that I'm talking about this concept of channel where I can drop it into a demo website. I can drop it into a public-facing website. I can drop it into a secure portal with a sign-in. I can also drop it for my staff, right? For like a business to enterprise sort of scenario where staff members need to access it inside of their internal channels like Teams, M365 Copilot, SharePoint channels, right? I can push all these components to where my users are going to interact with these agentic services, all as a part of the included capabilities that we provide inside of Copilot Studio. What you'll see here is that I'm actually purposely doing not a good practice, not what Karima has mentioned, because we actually want to keep this light. You notice with the instructions here, I almost had zero, got nothing on here. Obviously, we can do a lot better in terms of presenting the responses from the AI agents in the way that we want to present it to our users. But we want to just break it down really simple. Like, what is it really doing with the Dataverse with these various methods, right? So throughout this illustration that you'll see today is I'm keeping it plain simple. You can definitely put more things inside of the instructions to then further work with the LLM to get to the output results that you're really looking for. But we're going to just simplify it a little bit. So what we're going to do today is we're just going to start to break down what it means by bringing knowledge inside of Dataverse, right? I'm going to spend quite a bit of time to show you the Dataverse knowledge and the output that the agent provides. But again, notice that I've got a way to actually look at Bing Search Index, for example, to be able to look at public-facing websites and then pump that into the LLM so the LLM knows about a certain knowledge base, your services, the things that you care about in terms of wanting to communicate that to your customers, your citizens that you're talking to. And this is not just one first P first-party sort of services, right, where you can work with SharePoint and OneDrive and Azure AI services, but you can work with things like Salesforce, ServiceNow, Zendesk, Snowflake, right? The idea here is that your agent needs to then get tied into the system source of record to then be able to be grounded knowledge that you can reason with and doing searches against those system source of record with LLM as a way to actually work through the response. So what you're seeing here is that I've actually already created one with Dataverse on the back end here. And if you remember, we're just bringing in two tables, right? Really simple, a facility one and a facility service offering. What we really like about this knowledge component is that you'll be able to see all of the columns that's available that is indexed and then is doing semantic search index over, right? And what's beautiful about this, we got the concept of term definition and synonyms all the way across too. So imagine that a lot of the tables columns might be truncated, right? A lot of times if you think even from the SQL Server days, half of the table columns doesn't even make sense, right? So what we want to do is we actually want to tie this table columns to synonyms and definitions so that when a user is asking questions, the LLM will actually pick up the synonym in this definition and will route the user's inquiry and be really intelligent in how to actually retrieve those information in there, right? So you'll see here that I kind of gave it a little bit of help. It's like, hey, when you're looking for district, it's really west, it's really north, right? So that when the user is asking those components without very little hint, he can actually look at my term definition, my synonym, actually find where it needs to go. So let's go ahead and actually show you what it looks like here on the testing panel on the left, on the right. Now, what's beautiful about Copilot Studio that I'm showing you here, and the reason why we're looking behind the covers, is that you have this concept of chain of thought reasoning, right? Our activity tab. The idea behind chain of thought reasoning is that as the agent is thinking, the brain, the decision criteria, right? All of those is available to you as an observability and auditable components inside of the activity tab that's available to the makers and the admins, right? So what you're seeing here is a couple of things. This is me emulating what a user would do when interacting with the agent. Say, tell me about a phone number. And then what you're seeing here in the chain of thought activity is a kind of what we call rewritten query. The idea behind that is that you don't want to take the messy human conversation when they're asking a question. You want to take the most optimized version of that human's curiosity into something that's a little bit more legible for the system, right? So although I'm asking, can you tell me phone number for Daryl services? Please, you notice there when I'm zooming in, I put a Control 2, it even stuck a 2 in there in between, right? Like, so it's going to be able to actually take the human conversation as a part of this and is then running this particular query with semantic search index on the back end with Dataverse, right? So when it's actually pulling it back, that's what is getting sent to the Dataverse backend. So it's a lot happening here, but that's really the job between the grounded knowledge that we have with Dataverse and the orchestrator that's happening behind the scene too, to be able to strip some of those components and help be a little bit more streamlined. So let's go ahead and continue to ask questions here as a user. So again, I'm going to like test this concept of multi-turn, right? I'm going to ask like, what district is it a part of, right? Which is this Daryl services point. You notice there's a few Daryl services that it comes back with. So the idea here is that I'm now using the components of being able to find out the previously asked questions, then again, going into the next question that I have so that the agent, I want to make sure that they know start to finish sort of what I'm trying to achieve from a standpoint of a user, right? So let's do one more thing in asking the question here. I'm going to say, hey, what services does it provide? So I want to show that it doesn't necessarily have to be a one-to-one between the user and one table only. You notice I'm actually coming in and we're pulling in both the service offering and the facility tables across Dataverse. What I'm showing here is I'm able to ask the question from the facility table, but I can do a follow-up to actually test that concept of relationship. Remember, there's a many-to-many. So now I'm asking about this Daryl services point inside of the West. So I'm actually now taking that particular facility, I'm finding that particular relationship, and during that relationship, I'm pulling it in and figuring out what services it provides that lives in a completely different table, right? The knowledge grounding is smart enough to understand this concept of a relationship. It's smart enough to understand what the human wants to find out about, and is actually behind the scene stitching those relationships together, maintaining the context of the original question of facility, and then carrying that over to the next questions as well, right? So knowledge is really good in doing all of this. This is where I think, like, then the question is, you know, to to the point that Karima has mentioned, like, why wouldn't you just stick with knowledge, right? The short answer is you always want to start with something that is simple first, right? So knowledge is simple. It's a matter of just picking the table, giving a little synonym, and you can get up and running really quickly. But there's some scenarios where knowledge might not give you 100% of what you're looking for. So we'll give you an example of that, right? Like in here, I know that this is the West District. So I'm asking like, hey, tell me other facilities that's in the same district, which is West, right? Because this is retrieval augmented generation techniques, it's going to take the top results based on what you're asking for. It's going to be accurate in doing that because you're grounding it in Dataverse, but it's only going to truncate a lot of the responses to the top search result that is coming back with. So when I usually ask questions like this, the result that something gets back, so maybe it gives you top 5, so maybe it gives you top 10, right? It really depends on how the LLM is treating what the user's context is. And it looks like in this case, it didn't want to find it. Of course, awesome live demo at best here. But what tends to happen a lot of times is that actually truncates the search result that you're seeing coming back because it's doing retrieval augmented generation as a technique to come back. So that's where we need to go into the concept of tools, right? So how do we become just a little bit more precise in the thing that we want to search against and in the way that I actually want to come back? That's where we want to potentially use this concept of tools. And of course, with tools, again, CRUD, and thank you, M, for the reminder here. CRUD stands for Create, Read, Update, and Delete. So we've got over 1,400 connectors that's available here to be able to do those operations, not just from a standpoint of retrieval. But for our purposes, we're actually going to pull up Dataverse as a tool. And what you're going to see is Dataverse Connector gives you all of those capabilities. We're open it up. I'm just going to zoom in so you can see better here, right? There are things where I can get a particular record. I can update a particular record. I can delete, right? In our case, we actually want to retrieve multiple things at the same time. So the connector to get there, connector actions for Dataverse is list rows, right? I want to retrieve more than just one record. I want to come back with multiple facilities, but I want to come back in a very specific ways. So Karima mentioned this concept of OData filter, right? All of those things that if you come in from the Power Automate side of the world, this is going to feel really good for you, but you're going to be liberated from all of the previous syntax like strictness from a deterministic perspective, right? And I'll show you what I mean by that. In here, what you'll see is that I'm now already looking into the facilities table, right? In this current environment. And you're going to see here filter rows. And again, for those of you that come in from the Power Automate world, you probably are aware of the concept of OData filter, right? I've got a bunch of rows, a bunch of records. I just want a subset of it. The way to get there, the most effective way is using a syntax called OData filter. OData filter is not impossible to learn, but you need to know what the syntax is like, right? There's EQ in there, there's and there's an or. You kind of know what order you got to need to know there's single quotation, right? I don't come in from a professional development background, so I get tripped up all the time. You know, my best friend is actually the XRM toolbox to tell me what those syntax should be, right? So, but in here, using instead of the deterministic method, I can actually let AI form those OData filter on my behalf, right? So what you're seeing here is you're kind of doing pseudocode. You can see here, you're kind of describing to generative AI how to construct those OData filter on my behalf, right? And here, I'm using all natural language. I'm saying, hey, you know, OData filter is coming here, generative AI. So orchestrator, can you look at this natural language? I want to filter based on 2 columns, right? So in case you're not familiar why there's this thing's called a prefix from a standpoint of Dataverse. If you go to Dataverse on the column, you just click on the column itself under settings, you'll see what's called logical field. That's all I'm doing here. I just want to use the logical field. So I grab that from my Dataverse column definition, and I'm basically using natural language. It says like, hey, if you see the words that are coming in, that sounds like district, I want you to use this as a way to filter. If you see like city coming in, I want to use that other field. And again, all of these are just kind of pseudocode. I'm explaining to the generative AI what I'm expecting to see on the other side. So let's go ahead and actually show you what this thing would look like, right? So I'm going to go in and here on the tests, and say, hey, tell me the facilities located in north. I should have shown you. I didn't actually type north in the instructions, right? But the LLM is smart enough to know, it's like, hey, Bobby's got this other district that looks like directionally it's you know, west and east, so north must be it. What you're seeing here that is actually being retrieved from a standpoint of OData filter is this syntax that I didn't create myself, right? So it's understanding the messiness that might be coming from the user question, is able to compartmentalize that, pick up on just the word north, put it in the right place, take the filter, and then actually doing the retrieval. And now you can see that the quality that comes back is a lot better, right? where you saw before I even like our demo deity didn't actually cooperate with us, right? So it didn't actually want to pull it. But oftentimes in the knowledge sources, what you'll see is that it only picks like the top 5, the top 10, and we can influence some of those through the instructions. But really, if I want to get super specific, I want to use techniques like the tools here to be able to get at the rich result that I might be looking for. All right, coming back to you on the other pattern here, Karima. So I'm going to turn the screen back to you.
Amazing. Am I muted? All right. So that was amazing. I do want to tell you that I realized that you're using preview, and we might have gotten some surprise features in knowledge because I just realized that the section that I'm about to talk to you about is lighting up in preview in knowledge, actually. And so you actually previewed the next section to everyone. And we will talk about the pros and cons and why perhaps maybe you didn't get the result that you thought you were going to get when you tried this last week. All right. So there is another way of searching in Dataverse. And this is something that has been hyped a lot. We've talked about Dataverse search. We know that Dataverse search works a little bit differently, that you don't have to give so many keywords. It kind of is more lenient. It lets you have these kinds of spelling mistakes a lot more often. And so everybody's like, okay, so what is this API that does that under the covers? I haven't seen an actual Dataverse tool for me to be able to use that. And what is under it? How smart is this index? Is it like a vector index over all the tables? Apparently it can index some text columns, some text from your documents. Like, is it the same as file uploads in Copilot Studio? Is it smarter, less smart? So this is why we really wanted to bring you this other side and to let you know what you can use and what constraints there are for that. And there's a bunch of pros and cons. And if you don't know what it's for, then you might be surprised by the results. So I'm going to be calling it search query. People call it in many ways, even in our documentation, depending on which tool uses it. They'll call everything Dataverse search, or they'll call it structured, or they'll call it relevance, because it really fulfills a lot of things. It wears a lot of hats, and it appears in many places. So what is this search query API and tool that we have? So the first thing to know is that this was really made for those really, really large customers that have terabytes of data, that have hundreds of thousands, millions of lines, and some of the rows in their table are descriptions, and they are, you know, text attachments and things like that. And so they really needed a way to ask a question that goes and finds something in a text that kind of understands their intent without taking too long, because we still are talking about transactional agents here. We want a fast answer. We want it real time. We want people to be working and be able to ask questions over the data and continue working, not just waiting and then realizing, I need to ask the next question, and that'll just take you all day. So how can we have an index search that is also fast? And so we got this search query, which is a relevance search. And what does the relevance search do? This one is probabilistic, which means that when you ask a question, first of all, it'll only search on the columns that it indexes, and it indexes columns that have something like text in it. It won't just index Booleans and numbers and things like that. So it can only work on the indexed columns, and it can only return those, but it does return IDs. And so now you have like this little idea of, okay, so I can't do full retrievals with it, just like Bobby just did with list rows. So there's value in that, because I don't know if I can retrieve a whole phone number, but if I ask a question like a Daryl Center, it'll probably get me a whole bunch of good answers, right? And so the way it works is that instead of filtering first, it will search, fuzzy search first. And it will give you a whole bunch of relevance parameters in the answer. And from that, there is a second step where you can post filter it. But the post filter is on that relevance retrieval, which means that even though your filter is written perfectly, you're not going to get all the results. So if you put in the same filter in list rows and then did some sort of an AI prompt on that answer of list rows to look for Daryl, you will get more results than if you do the relevance search for the word Daryl and then post filter it with that same OData because it returns the top scoring answers. That's how it works. So that's basically, it's a discovery tool, right? So help me figure out what the user means is what search query is for. And it's often paired with list rows. And this is why it sounds like Knowledge now can do both. So how do we use this quickly? I just want to test it out. You get a version of it in Knowledge, but Knowledge has its own ways of truncating information and using its glossary. MCP server, the Dataverse MCP server, also exposes this endpoint. It also exposes a whole bunch of other MCP endpoints, for example, CRUD operations. And so when you pick an Dataverse MCP tool in Copilot Studio, it's up to you to turn on and turn off the tools that you care about. And so pick the ones that are retrieval based. So now you'll have access to list rows, you'll have access to the search. Okay, next, if you really want it to work, we have an extra step to do. We need to choose from our Dataverse tables which columns we want indexed, because what happens? The index for this one actually takes space. And so you want to be careful about how much space you use. You want to index the things you care about, don't index the things you don't care about. So you have control over what gets indexed. So there's a little gray box here that has instructions on how to set it up. Make sure that the stuff that you care about appears in the index so that it can be retrieved and searched over. And then once you've decided what MCP tools you want, now, and you have added and removed columns that you want indexed, you could also add or remove tables from the solution index and only expose the tables that you want to be indexed. So you do have control over that. And if you don't want to wait for your indexing, pro tip is, if you add a table to Knowledge, the under the covers Dataverse starts indexing right away. So if you're impatient, you can go and do that. And what you get is some sort of a semantic range, and you get tool versatility, and it comes with starter descriptions. The MCP server is able to pull the table descriptions that you created when you made the table. So it already has a beginning of a glossary to work on. It's really a great entry point to converse over tables and narrow down what you're going to do. And I had to tell you about the known constraints, right? So your MCP server will, with list rows, still be able to access every single table. So you can't really narrow down what table you're going to converse over. And your DLP settings are per connector, and MCP is treated as one whole connector. So you either allow it or you don't. You also can't write the queries yourself when you use the MCP because those are happening under the covers. And maybe you don't want to control them. But if you do, then perhaps you're going to need to use some way to access the search underneath. You also can't control the number of agent calls that happen with the Dataverse MCP because all the tools in the MCP know about each other. So now you just have a bunch of tools. They know about each other. They know your glossary. And so if you need a second step, if you need to research, it has its own way of deciding which tool is going to get to use when. It has those descriptions that tells your orchestrator, use these tools until you get this kind of result. And so you might not have one tool call when you call MCP, the Dataverse MCP, you might have multiple. And one good reason for that is you need to do a fuzzy search followed by a deterministic retrieval to actually get all the information that you're looking for. So it's normal that it's more than a one-step process. And there's a lot of other control that you give away to the MCP server when you use that. But out of the box, it allows you to just talk over all the tables in your environment. So that is super powerful, really gives you a hang of what should happen. And then for your very, very critical enterprise grade use case, you can go and take back control. For example, if you have municipal services, then you can have your municipal services that you use through MCP. And then if they're emergency services, perhaps you want to make a specialized tool because you have different business rules for that. And for that, you can configure search query. I have a gray box here that tells you how you can do that. There is actually the Dataverse Unbound Connector action that has the search query action. And this one, it's really that first level of fuzzy search that comes back. It's great to leverage. It does index the first megabyte of 2 megabytes of text from any attached files and really opens up your extremely large data use cases. And so
I wonder if we can show that, Karima.
Yeah,
I know we're
let's
a little
go.
bit short on
Let's
time,
go.
so appreciate you laying down the foundation there. I won't spend too much time on
Yeah,
the MCP, but it's I think it might be good to kind of see it on action, right? Go ahead, Darian.
Really quick. Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, I didn't want to cut you guys off because
Yep.
it looks like people are really interested. I haven't seen anybody drop, which is like that
Okay.
never happens. That never happens. So please keep going. Maybe
Awesome.
we aim to finish by like 15 after the hour at the most, because we do, if you can spend
Yeah.
about maximum 10 minutes, we want to give at least 10
For
minutes
sure.
for Q&A.
Thanks,
So,
Darian. And
sure.
checks on the way for people that stick around. And Karima will send it your way. So thank you. All right, just real quick here, because you're seeing here MCP as a tool, right, in terms of Dataverse MCP. And as Karima has mentioned, it's basically MCP under the cover is essentially multiple APIs and things and operations that's happening completely behind the scene, right? And what's beautiful about MCP is that normally we would have to essentially have multiple connectors to kind of have the same experience. So the idea of the MCP is that what can we do as a user perspective? I just want to get stuff done, right? What if I'm just talking to the MCP and the MCP then becomes the traffic cop to kind of figure out like what is the connectors and what is the retrieval, what are the operation that I'm trying to do on the back end. So what you're seeing here is what comes out of the box with Dataverse MCP. I know there was a couple questions too in terms of like what you should be using in terms of if you've got Dynamics 365, right? Just know at the end of the day, Dynamics 365 also sits on Dataverse. So a lot of the things that we're seeing here in terms of techniques for Dataverse connectors as tools and MCP also applies for a lot of the Dynamics 365 customer engagement modules as well. But you can see here from a standpoint of retrieval, I've actually disabled a lot of the create, update, and deletes. So what you could see here, I could start to actually ask question, like say, hey, tell me about this particular facility. And what you're going to see is on the left, right? Again, our chain of thought reasoning, the things that the MCP is doing, they're doing a bunch of things that essentially will take my question to then process it based on what it thinks it should be doing. You notice there's a couple of things here that's kind of streaming, right? Like it's sometimes generative AI is actually streaming in thoughts which you don't want. We can control some of these through agent instructions. So this is some of the cleanup work that we can have on the agent instruction side to ensure that it's producing the right output. But that's not really as important right now because it's really just more about understanding what the MCP is doing. So it's taking essentially like, hey, I've got Canyon Community Access Facility. I'm listing all of the table inside of Dataverse, right? So in here, you're going to see that the MCP is kind of calling like, here's all the Dataverse tables that's available to me. But the one that is going to really care about the Canyon Community Access is really a facility one. So it's able to find all of that on my behalf without really having to stitch all those components. That's the beauty of MCP, right? I'm going to make it easy on the makers, on the users, and remove the abstraction layer and just really taking it down to simplifying what the user wants and getting to the output that I want. So you're going to see that there's multiple operations that MCP is actually firing, but really at the end goal, I'm looking for clarity of insights, or I'm looking for information. So there's a lot there that MCP can provide, But what it doesn't do sometimes is because like it kind of removes some of the granularity control that you might want to have for some scenarios, right? So we'll give you one here that say, hey, tell me about Daryl West Civics, right? I purposely am giving this an open-ended question. What you're seeing here in the chain of thought reasoning, right, is actually looking for Daryl West Civics, and it's looking for an equal, which is going to be looking for an exact match. That's why it's actually not coming back, because I think in the back end, it's actually Daryl West Civics Community Center or something to that effort, right? So as a user, I can technically help it and say, hey, can you find one that's similar to that? And what you're going to see is they're going to take my cue, my instruction is going to change the operation that it needs to do on the back end, right? So it's able to pull it out. And what you're seeing in the back end in the chain of thought reasoning is that it's going to put like kind of in between, right? So MCP, the promise is there. We don't think that it's at a point where you can use it for a lot of this outside of some simple scenarios. It might be something that you evaluate whether you can use MCP or not. But the direction that you're going to see, not just from a standpoint of Dataverse, but just as agentic service altogether, is really simplifying how an agent is using and working through user inquiries to be able to bring it to the operation that you need. And one way to get there is using model context protocols. We'll do one more here in terms of the unbound that Karima has mentioned, right? So you saw that there's some issues that I've got with Daryl Civic Center, right? I really have to help it to make it expand on the search. So if you've got like a lot of the fuzzy type searching where I want to look for a word that sounds like something, right? I want to be able to capture some of those components. What you might want to look into in terms of a pattern is potentially what we call an unbound, perform unbound as a connector actions for Dataverse, right? When you do that, you can actually go and look for search query action name, and then you can pick basically which column you want to search against. Now, if you look at this, it looks a little bit messy, but it's nothing more than just a couple brackets and curly braces in there. It's basically saying like, here is the fields that I want to search against where in the data sets or the tables. And then Karima's actually included how to make sure that your tables and your columns are all indexed properly. There's a few steps to get there, but what you get as the benefit to this is that you can actually come here and say, hey, find Daryl. There's actually no DAROL as a facility on the back end. But what you're seeing here from a search perspective is using Dataverse smartness on the back end to do fuzzy and relevant searching. And you're going to see Daryl is the search term. It's actually pulling that component in terms of the instructions that I gave it through that unbound performance. And then what you're going to see is coming back with anything that sounds like Daryl, right? Like DAREL, DARYL, right? Like you were not getting this with a lot of the things that we were working with before. And we'll show you one more. I know we're running short on time here, which is another retrieval mechanism using prompt, right? This is probably my favorite because I can actually give it a little bit more instructions. And from here inside of the prompt, using natural language and instructions, I can actually bring Dataverse knowledge directly into it. So if you click on this, all the table that's available in Dataverse becomes a knowledge that I can put with additional instructions to be able to work with those fields across not just one table, but multiple tables as well, right? In this case, I'm just doing it inside a facility. And then you can see here, imagine this is the value that's coming in from the user. Tell me about Daryl Civic's office, right? If I were to actually run this, by the way, as this is running, I can actually click on this model. It comes with all of the GPT models and the Anthropic model that you can choose for and see which one and evaluate which one is actually more effective. And because we are built right on top of Microsoft Foundry, any of the 13,000 model that's chat enabled, you can actually bring that right into this drop down here as well, right? So there might be model that might be more specific to the output that you're looking for. You can bring that right in here in the prompt as well. You can see the output here is actually already doing something like fuzzy searching anyways, right? Hey, Daryl Civic's office is not here, but I see two that's pretty close. But I can flip this a little bit as well, and I can ask it for different things. So in here, if I were to say, hey, how many facilities are in the West, right? Because I've asked it like about a particular record. Maybe I want to do an aggregation or summation or a calculation, right? Like I can do those components as well because I'm essentially taking the user query, pointing it to the subset of filter records that I have got in the Dataverse. And then now this is the response that the agent can create all using natural language and pointing it into the Dataverse tables on the back end. So If you give it a second here, you'll see that because I'm asking how many facilities, it's able to do an aggregate across all of those filter rows and then pull it up and do a calculation on my behalf and then present this back to the user. So I know we went kind of fast there, but those are just some of the additional components that we can provide in terms of working directly with the Dataverse table backend. So back to you, Garima.
Amazing. That was really fast, and you covered a lot. That was so good. I have one more slide to share here to just bring everything together. Bear with me. I'll just share. So here, perhaps you want to take a screenshot. I tried to give you a matrix so that you can go home with a one-pager that explains everything we were talking about and perhaps summarizes really the important column, which is the common escalation, where I'm using table knowledge and when am I going to realize that, oh, I think I need to use something else. And these are the things that we have noticed either from our customers or from the actual usage or actual features. And these are the things that people don't always think about. And so, main reasons for using each type of tool to make your agent intelligent over Dataverse, and then main escalation paths of what you really needed, what you're not getting, and what you should try next. I hope that is really helpful to you guys. I can take more questions in the chat if you like, or anything specific about this table. I don't want to spend too much time because we are going over, but really, you don't have to stick to just one of these. If you are making your tools with list rows or with search query, if you are making your own orchestration, a great way to do this with an enterprise grade approach is to rename your connector to the function that it has, because the orchestrator really doesn't need to know that you're going off to Dataverse. All it needs to know is what the function is. And so over my facilities, I can have one list rows that is just for emergency use cases, and that has a whole bunch of business rules attached to it that I'm going to spend more time configuring. And then I can put all the rest of the use cases onto MCP or general knowledge, and then I can route requests that way. And so put less effort in the ones where you don't need as much control, put more effort configuring the ones where you need control, and that's how you get an agent that really performs according to your business rules. And I can't wait to see your use cases.